Hello, and welcome back to another episode of RPEC on Air, a podcast produced by the Retired Public Employees Council of Washington. I'm your host and RPEC's project coordinator, Alyssa Brady. In our last episode, we talked about the impending legislative session, which now that it's March of the new year, we're pretty deep into. So we're going to provide a little update on where we're at, and we're also going to give an update on our federal relations. So fortunately, I'm joined once again by RPEC's Executive Director, Laurie Weidner. Laurie, welcome back. Hello.
Hi, members.
Hi.
So nice to be with you.
And we're also joined by our Associate Director, Derek VanSpoor. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Okay, so we'll get right into it. So Laurie, let's do a recap with a brief overview of some of the highs and lows heading into this legislative session.
Wonderful. Okay, so we have had actually, I think, many highs leading into this long legislative session. I want to start by reminding our members that RPEC does have a contracted lobbyist that works with us on a limited contract and has been instrumental in working with me and with our team on strategy. So that's important to note. That's your member dollars put to good work to protect your retirement security. We also have access to federal lobbyists through our affiliation with AFSCME retirees. So let's talk about the highs. So for a number of years, we have prioritized working with the Select Committee on Pension Policy to develop legislation that would restore a recurring cost of living adjustment to our members who are vested in HERS and TERS 1 retirement systems. The work that we did leading into this session is as a result of work that we did uniquely back in 2023 when RPEC fought for language in a bill that passed through the legislative process that required this joint legislative committee to study and recommend legislation to fund a recurring cost of living adjustment. So where we are leading into this session is has a direct relationship to the work that our members have done with the council over these many years. So thank you, everybody. Many of you answered the call to action. You mobilized with us in person as well as digitally. And because of your efforts, a preliminary bill was filed in December, meaning that it would be given consideration in the new legislative session. It's important to note that the Select Committee on Pension Policy is kind of like the gatekeeper. And so the legislature looks to this joint legislative committee, meaning that it's made up of experts who deal with pension policy, like the director of the Department of Retirement Systems. We have a voting member who serves on that committee, a former lobbyist with AFSCME. But this also includes legislators on both sides of the political aisle, as well as legislators representing both chambers. So it's a bipartisan committee that recommends pension policy. So bills that come through that process have a higher likelihood of passage through the legislative process. So that's what members need to know. I want to talk about our healthcare victories. So we had, again, many leading into this legislative session. The most noteworthy of which is RPEC has led for years on preserving traditional Medicare options available to the public sector retirees who earn their healthcare benefits from the Public Employees Benefits Board. And so from RPEC's unique work, our members had the opportunity in open enrollment to choose a plan that maintained benefits, was a government self-insured plan, which is very similar to traditional Medicare, and it included an important added pharmacy benefit, Part D benefit. And so that is a victory that came through legislation that we were instrumental in passing in a past legislative session. We also had worked with partners to express concern about the merger of the Public Employees Benefits Board and the School Employees Benefits Board. Our main concern about a proposal that was circulating and a study was that that merger in some way might inhibit the ability of RPEC members to be at the table and to inform policy decision-making. So we've remained vigilant in our efforts to communicate our position for our members. Also on the healthcare front federally, RPEC has been leading a coalition called the Medicare Stakeholders Coalition that has been working with various federal level legislators to shore up oversight of Medicare Advantage advertising. So this is a gap in the oversight that's provided by the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And RPEC is leading on that. So these are some of the highlights of our work. And we thank you for all the work that you have done with us leading into this session. I'd like to quickly talk about the state budget deficit. We learned of an impending state budget deficit in the fall of 2024. The 2025 operating budget for the state is in balance. However, there is a projected structural deficit for the state in the biennial budget, which is the main reason why the legislature meets during the long legislative session. It's to craft and to pass a biennial budget. And the projected deficit in the biennial budget for fiscal years 2026 and 2027 is roughly somewhere between $10 and $15 billion. Where did this come from? There's lower tax returns. The state overestimated the money that would come into its coffers from capital gains taxes. Consumer spending has slowed. And although the state is focused on many priorities that contribute to positive quality of life for all of us, those commitments cost money and those commitments are expensive. So we are entering this legislative session, which we are about in the middle of, with a structural deficit, and that is overshadowing discussions about bills that do important things for Washingtonians, but may have a price tag behind them.
All right. Well, thank you, Laurie. So, Derek, I have a question for you. Where are we in the legislative session now?
Well, currently, and we're recording on March 13th. So as of today, we are day 60 in the session. We have 45 days of regular session left.
Can you explain to our listeners what you mean when you say regular session?
Sure. Regular session is the scheduled session for the legislature. They have a long session on the odd years and an even or a short session on the odd years, which is basically a supplemental session. Being that they have a budget to deal with this year, hopefully they can get this done within the time frame of the regular session. But usually after they take care of all the other bills, they will hunker down and deal with the state budget, and that could extend past the deadline for the regular session, which then the governor would call a special session to finish that work. And that would, if that does happen, that would probably most likely occur in May.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a few dates coming up. Yesterday was the cutoff for floor votes for the House of Origin. That means that if a bill started in the House, if it was a House bill, it had to have passed a floor vote yesterday to continue. Same with the Senate. We've already passed the fiscal House of Origin cutoff and the committee House of Origin cutoff dates. So if anything that started in one chamber and was not voted on by that chamber as of yesterday, those bills are no longer in motion. So the last day of session right now is scheduled for April 27th. We do have a few more cutoffs coming. April 2nd is a committee cutoff. So bills that passed one chamber, they go to the opposite chamber. They get heard in any assigned committee or a fiscal committee. So for regular committees, the cutoff is April 2nd. For any fiscal related bills, the cutoff for those will be April 8th. And then April 16th is the opposite House cutoff, and that is the last day for bills to be heard or for floor votes in the opposite chamber. So those are the upcoming dates that we have prior to the expiration of this session. With those deadlines mentioned, the only other one that we have is a fiscal forecast. Would you like to offer some input there, Laurie?
Thanks, Derek. So we talked a few moments ago about the budget deficit that's anticipated. And it's important to note that from the time that this deficit was made public in the fall of 2024 through the recording of this message today to all of you, various state agencies have been asked to trim their budgets. There has been lots of communication that's been available across the state about the deficit and its challenges. The fiscal forecast comes out at various times throughout the year, and it's done by the Office of Financial Management. It's hoped that when we see the fiscal forecast on March 20th of this year, everyone in the state will have a better idea of where the state will come in from a revenue standpoint and from a spending standpoint for fiscal years 26 and 27. This information is vital to the state being able to craft a budget that addresses current needs, funds necessities, and also brings down spending in a way that will allow for a balanced budget. So stay tuned. That information is coming out on March 20th.
A week from today. All right. Yeah, so then before we start talking about the bills that we've been tracking, there's over 30 for this session. Laurie, can you tell us how RPEC determines our bill positions?
Yeah, I think this is really important for our members, so thank you, Alyssa. We are affiliated with the national union, and we're structured in the same way. So our legislative priorities document is devised by our members who come together at our biennial convention and set the organizational priorities. And so the legislative priorities are both short-term, meaning the upcoming legislative session, as well as long-term. And some of these priorities are recurring, and some are new based on the policy and legislative landscape. It is important to note that this member-driven document, which is our first line of evaluation on our potential position on bills, is a nonpartisan document. RPEC is a nonpartisan organization. We do not align with one party over the other. Our mission is to support your retirement security at a state and federal level. And it's through that lens that our members develop the legislative priorities document. And it's through that lens that we evaluate every single potential policy and bill opportunity. So the first line of evaluation is our legislative priorities document, which, as I said, it's established at our biennial convention. It also is reviewed at least 4 times a year by the legislative committee, which includes appointed members from across the state. So members are constantly given opportunity to provide input into this document so that it is a living document. Case in point, a federal priority was achieved in 2024, and that priority was removed because it was accomplished at a federal level. So as I mentioned, we have a legislative committee. This is made up of members from across the state. The committee is chaired by a member and a co-chair who's also a member. Our president also sits as an ex officio on that committee. And this is the next level of evaluation. Our legislative committee is responsible for providing input on our potential policy positions based on available time. And the same with our work group. So we have two work groups that contribute to policy development. They primarily do research and make recommendations up through our legislative committee. The first is the pension policy work group. And so they study and make recommendations to the legislative committee relative to our priorities on pension policy, which relates to our work with the Select Committee on Pension Policy, which I mentioned earlier. The other work group is called the Healthcare Work Group, and they also work to provide recommendations, and they have also done outstanding work with us in developing content to help our members better navigate the complicated healthcare landscape, both in Washington and federally. And then finally, the other evaluation mechanism that we use is we touch base with partners. So RPEC serves on a variety of coalitions. We are part of the Washington State Labor Council, and so we do consult with our labor partners. We work very closely with other retiree organizations. We work with advocates in the healthcare space whose agendas align with ours, meaning that they want to make sure that traditional Medicare is strengthened and available for future generations. And so we try to touch as many of these points as possible before rendering a position on a bill. That said, we have no warning when a bill is scheduled for a hearing. Often it's done very quickly. So we use the legislative priorities first, and we try to glean as much input as we can prior to rendering a decision. In some cases, we are not able to check off each one of these evaluation levels, but we strive to do that with each bill. Finally, what I'll mention is bills are dynamic as they move through the legislative process. Derek mentioned earlier that bills that have not received a floor vote are dead. Yes, if they continue through the legislative process, they can change. Sometimes they can change substantially. And so we may have supported a bill in its original fashion early in the legislative session, but perhaps as it moves through the committee process, it is amended with a second substitute, for example. And if that occurs, we may or may not take a positive position. Our position could change very radically based on how those amendments line up against this evaluation process that I've just outlined.
Yeah. Did you want to talk about the mobilizations as well?
So Derek is going to pivot now and give you an overview of the bills that are on our radar that have endured through this stage of the legislative process. Before he discusses those bills, I just want to give a shout out to our members for their consistent support. I talked about your important work leading into the session. You have done important work since the session began in mid-January. You have answered the call to actions that we have put out, calling you to sign in with a specific position that aligns with our legislative priorities. Thank you for answering those calls to action. Some of you have responded to some targeted outreach that we have led, and we've asked you to reach out to specific legislators. We thank you for doing that work. And I also want to thank the hundreds of RPEC members who worked with Alyssa in our virtual legislative week, which took place in early February. That was a huge success. It came at a pivotal time in the legislative session. So I just want to thank you for those efforts. And with that, Derek, would you please talk about some of our priority bills in the cost of living adjustment space?
Absolutely. So Laurie had mentioned earlier about our work with SCPP over the interim. And so two bills came out regarding the Plan 1 COLA from SCPP. It was request legislation. That was Senate Bill 5113 and House Bill 1292. Both of those were asking for a one-time cost of living increase for 2025, and then a recurring COLA for Plan 1 members beginning in 2026. Both of those bills have not made it out of committee, so they are no longer moving. There was another bill introduced, House Bill 1474, that was requesting a one-time cost of living increase for Plan 1 members. That was from the Office of Financial Management. That was in alignment with former Governor Inslee's budget request to the legislature. And with the floor vote deadline being yesterday, that is no longer in movement. So the one bill that is still moving regarding Plan 1 COLAs is Senate Bill 5085, which was sponsored by Senator June Robinson, who is chairs of Ways and Means. That bill combines PERS 1, TERS 1, which is a teacher's retirement, and LEF 1, which is law enforcement and firefighters. And it combines them into what they're calling a legacy plan. And that offers a one-time COLA for PERS and TERS in 2025 of 3%, and then an ongoing COLA beginning in 2026. That bill has passed the Senate and is now in House Appropriations waiting a hearing. So we're going to continue to monitor that and mobilize on that bill.
Yeah, thank you. And we've got other pension related bills that we've been working on too. Laurie, can you tell us about some of those?
Yes. So the first bill I want to address is House Bill 2034. This bill was introduced very late in this legislative session. It is sponsored by the four most powerful fiscal leaders on the House Appropriations Committee. So this bill is sponsored by Tim Ormsby, who's the committee chair, as well as Representative Joe Fitzgibbon, Representative Mia Gregerson, and Representative Nicole Macri. So what this bill does is it takes the state's overinvestment in the existing left plan. It closes the left plan and it uses that overage to redirect it to the state, likely to help offset that big deficit that we talked about earlier. This bill does not harm the lawmakers in left. This bill, simply addresses the state's deficit. RPEC's position on this bill has been other. And the reason for that is we have asked legislators in writing, and we will do so in testimony today, to work with us on amending this bill so that it provides equity in the pension plans. So that is an important distinction, and it's been a priority for the Select Committee on Pension Policy to restore equity. What does that mean? It means that all the plans are properly funded. It means that all of those retirees who were invested in one of the Plan 1 plans benefit from an annual cost of living adjustment. And so we are other with concern, and we will wait and see what happens in the hearing. That is a concerning bill for a variety of reasons. It passes over our PERS and TERS 1 retirees. Substitute Senate Bill 5357 is a bill that we opposed. Both of these bills died in the legislative process. These bills would have done kind of something similar to the previous bill I just talked about. They use a funding formula to save the state money in the financing of the Plan 1 plans. So PERS and TERS 1 both have an unfunded amount of money that is being financed. So it uses a creative way of refinancing that unfunded balance in order to save the state money. It's quiet on restoring a recurring cost of living adjustment to PERS and TERS 1, And it also does nothing to pay off the unfunded liability in plans in the PERS and TERS 1 plan. So it's a bill we did not support, and it's now dead. There were bills that also dealt with the ability for retirees to work while they are retired. Now, the bills that went through the session just extended the deadline by which retirees could not only earn their pension, but also work. So while the bills failed, and that the bill is Senate Bill 5738, the current statute allows a retiree to work up to 1,040 hours through July 1st of 2027. So just so you know, as background on the bills that relate to retiree employment, they came out of the education community, and they wanted the ability to tap retired administrators like principals and district level administrators, and also non-certificated, meaning anyone who doesn't teach, to tap those pools of people to shore up workforce shortages in certain school districts. So it would have extended the deadline, but a person can still draw their pension and work in those environments according to current statute. And then finally, there were two bills that came out of the Select Committee on Pension Policy, which we supported and have supported now. We did as well through the last legislative session. The bills are Senate Bill 5114 and House Bill 1123. These bills extend the pension benefits to retirees in their last month of life, to enable their survivors to utilize their pension to pay for end-of-life expenditures and medical costs. So unfortunately, those bills did die. They didn't receive floor votes, likely because the bills were expensive. So at this juncture, we're starting to see good bills that solve important problems, accomplish important policy solutions die because they are costly to implement, and the state's looking for ways to save money. They want to cover their existing priorities and only those things that are necessary in order to shore up the budget, so that there isn't a huge deficit in 26 and 27.
Yeah, I did want to also add during legislative week, members, they submit reports on their legislator meetings, and it was not uncommon. Almost every single time, legislators had noted their concerns with the budget, and even if they were supportive of the bills that we had talked about, a lot of them said ultimately it was going to come down to what things were looking like budget-wise. So before we start talking about our healthcare related bills, just to give you all some background, in 2023, RPEC conducted an all-member survey, and through that, we had found that our members who were on plans 2 or 3 wanted us to focus on healthcare and federal relations. So RPEC has had over the years many substantial victories in healthcare policy. We've been at the forefront of preserving traditional Medicare options here in Washington state. We've earned top labor awards for leadership in healthcare policy. We've earned a top labor award from the Washington Education Association Retired for healthcare advocacy, top labor award from the Washington Association of Retired Americans for healthcare related advocacy. So this is nothing new. Leadership, our leadership is important. Good things are happening in Washington. RPEC provides that expertise and knowledge. This is something that benefits everybody, improving healthcare access and affordability. So with that, yes, Laurie, I would love it if you could tell us about the healthcare related bills that we've been looking at this session.
Okay. I'm going to start with a quick discussion about the Medicare related bills. So there were a series of Medicare related bills that unfortunately failed, and they would have benefited people who have decided to transition off Medicare Advantage plans and access Medigap plans. And so the bills are quite technical, but we supported all of them. And it's unfortunate that they did not pass through the legislative process, but we hope that they will gain some traction in future legislative sessions. We have supported a bill that is called Engrossed Second Substitute, Senate Bill 5083. This bill came out of a study done by the Healthcare Authority around cost transparency and healthcare cost affordability for patients as well as for the state. So this is considered to be agency request legislation. The agency is the Healthcare Authority. We supported this bill from the moment it was filed. And what it does is it uses Medicare rates for hospitalization, for primary care, and for behavioral health. It provides savings to patients. It also saves the state money in healthcare oversight. This model that is being proposed has worked well in other states, including our neighboring Oregon. And so it has been widely supported, and it continues through the legislative process. It was voted off the Senate floor, and it has been referred to the House Appropriations Committee. Its companion bill did not succeed, and it is dead. So we're thrilled that this bill continues through the legislative process. I mentioned about our work leading into session around a bill that related to the merger of the Public Employees Benefits Board and the School Employees Benefits Board. That bill did not succeed, and so that one is also dead. We have been behind supporting Senate House Bill 1142. This bill has been very popular in the legislature. It actually has a hearing today in Senate Health and Long-Term Care. And what it does is it provides in-home care training for spouses, for partners, and for professionals who provide in-home care to seniors. And we think and for those with disabilities, and we think it's an important bill. And the legislature does too. It continues to move through the process. I want to mention one final thing before Derek talks about some other priorities in the healthcare space for RPEC this legislative session. And that is our work through the legislative priorities document not only pertains to legislation, but it pertains to the work that we do on your behalf with state agencies. That's why earlier I talked about our important successes that we have garnered for you, especially for those who get their benefits from the Public Employees Benefits Board. So we have preserved a Medicare-like plan and improved its affordability. The state, meaning the Healthcare Authority, currently provides $183. It's called a Medicare Explicit Subsidy. So they provide that subsidy to offset the cost of the most expensive plans that are managed by the Public Employees Benefits Board. And RPEC, for years, has been fighting to increase that amount. In fact, those who've been members, you probably remember that we were leading on legislation last year about this. Well, given the fiscal crisis, and given what I said earlier, every state agency was asked to propose a series of cuts to their agency budget in order to contribute to lowering the deficit. And the Healthcare Authority decided that one of their budget saving moves would be to decrease that offset to our seniors who are receiving their Medicare-related health care through the Healthcare Authority. So the Healthcare Authority's proposal to our new governor, Governor Ferguson, was to reduce that Medicare explicit subsidy to $90. The good news is that through our advocacy with the governor, he did not include that recommendation in his preliminary budget. So the funding level that is being recommended at this juncture in the budget development process by both chambers is to retain the $183. That's an important fiscal offset. And without it, for example, one plan, the Uniform Medical Plan Classic Medicare with Part D, without that explicit subsidy, our retirees would be paying over $600 for that plan. So this explicit subsidy is very important, and I'm really delighted that RPEC continues to advocate for members and that we have voiced our support for sustaining that explicit subsidy at $183. All of that equates into healthcare affordability for you. Derek, do you want to talk about some of the remaining healthcare related bills that are moving through the legislature?
Sure. We have two what are called Senate joint memorials, and those are much like resolutions that we may have at our convention. The first is SJM 8002. That one is related to leveling the playing field for Medicare, such as adding dental, hearing, and vision options to Medicare as is found in Medicare Advantage. The other is SJM 8004, and that one is promoting universal health care nationwide. And both of those are awaiting hearings. They've passed the Senate, and both of those are awaiting hearings in the House Healthcare and Wellness Committees next week. And if those are passed, those proceed to our congressional delegation, respective agencies at the federal level and the president's office.
So these priorities, remember where they come from. They come from the legislative priorities document that was developed by our members, and actually making sure that we have a strong Medicare program that's available for current and future generations of retirees has been a longstanding priority for RPEC, and we've demonstrated leadership there. And then on universal health care, that's a long-term priority for RPEC. So that's where our advocacy comes from. Thanks, Derek.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about what we're working on at the state level. So let's talk about what is happening with federal relations.
So I want to reiterate something that Alyssa said earlier. We conducted an all-member survey at the direction of our executive board to just affirm and to learn more about the priorities, policy priorities, and legislative priorities of all our members. That information laid the foundation for our strategic plan. And one of the priorities for our members, as Alyssa said earlier, is to continue to lead in federal relations. And so our legislative committee at a state level, which is made up of our members, just recently adopted a federal advocacy work plan. So they will be working with our council office on federal relations priorities as articulated in the legislative priorities document. I mentioned earlier we have access to federal lobbyists through our affiliation with AFSCME retirees. So we have a new administration in the White House, and every administration that comes into the White House has different financial priorities, different policy priorities. Our priorities don't change. They're established by our members through our legislative priorities documents. And so we are continuing to advocate for your retirement security. And so we are monitoring the landscape around Medicare and around Social Security. And regardless of the party, we are a nonpartisan organization. Regardless of party, if a party takes steps to somehow erode your retirement security, we have an obligation to you as our members to step into the ring and to advocate for you, because it's our collective voice. So we are monitoring the federal landscape. We are working currently, I mentioned this earlier, with partners on an important area, again, nonpartisan, that will help our retirees who perhaps are overwhelmed by the complexity of the healthcare landscape in Washington and federally. So together we are working with the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services to improve oversight of the advertising around Medicare Advantage plans. That is important. It is a way of educating our members about the strengths and weaknesses of those plans. And that's a gap in the policy implementation process at a federal level. And RPEC is leading that coalition. So this is an illustration of what we are doing. It's nonpartisan, and everything we do is nonpartisan. So please bear that in mind. I do want to talk about a program that AFSCME has articulated for us. We're participating. And it is around strengthening our congressional relationships. Now, our chapters have always met with the Washington delegation. We want to make sure that we are being more intentional in that space. And so AFSCME is calling it the PAL program. And they're working to train some of our members who may not have as much experience in working with federal legislators to build those relationships. And so we're working with AFSCME. We aim to build the relationships in congressional districts 3, 4, and 5. And so those are some of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention at a federal level. And I would just urge you to stay informed. And with that, I want to transition to Elsa.
Yeah, so there are a lot of ways that you can stay informed during session, also outside of session. RPEC makes it very easy for you. So you've passed one step listening to this podcast. We're also going to do an end of session episode. Then you can also read our weekly action news flash that goes out on Fridays. We have different articles in there. There might be calls to action for you to respond to. And then you can also attend our weekly legislative update calls that are held via Zoom on Fridays from 2 to 3 p.m. Those are weekly during session. And then they move to the first Friday of the month after session. So that's starting May 2nd. And it's at the same time, 2 to 3 p.m., and it's via Zoom. Then you can, of course, visit our website. We have a list of filed bills that relate to our priorities, and we update that regularly. Again, we're tracking over 30 bills, so couldn't cover all of them in this episode, but you can look through there. We've got links so you can see who the sponsors are, everything like that. And again, with the calls to action that we had mentioned, please respond to those quickly. They're very timely, sometimes with 24 hours or less to act. It's very important for legislators. They need to hear from their constituents. So please respond to those. And we had also talked about our work groups and our committees and our executive board. So attending those meetings is a really good way for you to get updates on what's happening. And you can also see the process of how we review and maybe determine our legislative priorities. So that's the healthcare work group. They are next meeting March 27th and April 10th. We've got the pension policy work group. They're meeting March 21st. And the legislative committee will meet April 11th, and then they don't meet after that until July 11th. And then the RPEC executive board will be meeting on May 5th, and we will also be providing an end of session update at that meeting. So these all are on the RPEC website calendar where you can find the Zoom links as well. All of these are virtual, so no matter where you are, you can sit in on the meetings and you can ask questions. But those are really great ways that you can stay informed. So yeah, thank you, Laurie and Derek. Thank you all for listening to RPEC on Air, and we will talk to you next time. I think that works. Let's do another take just in case.